Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for the time that we can spend with you today. Lord, we just pray that you will watch over us, protect us. I pray that those that need calm down will be calmed down, but those that need to be, frankly, scared because they're not right with the Lord will react accordingly and get right with the Lord at this time. Pray that you will bless us this day. In Jesus' name, amen. So today, my friend Charlie Garrett down at the Superior Word in Sarasota, Florida, who also does a prophecy update, and I did one when I was at his church last May, he kind of was, let's be honest, he was judging me for my title last week because I said convergence again. And he said, you're using that too much. So somebody suggested this in a Facebook comment that this would be a good title this week, Convergency, because that seems to be what it's like. So I know I'll be judged for that title, but it's not mine, it's somebody else. And I apologize, I don't remember who told me that, and I will give you credit if you want, but if you don't want to be associated with me, I understand wholeheartedly. But today we're going to talk about convergency, and I think it's a good made-up word to describe the situation that we live in. We talk all the time about the convergence of events and the different things that we see that are leading up to ultimately to the return of the Lord to set up his kingdom. It is, and I've used these titles, these magazine covers for a long time, and I think that they still have a good shelf life. They are still operative with the things that are going on in the world. It's pretty amazing. So I'm going to apologize for some of the things that this is going to be a little bit disjointed because there's just so much going on, and it all seems to be so interrelated. So let's just look at something political at the beginning. Now, I talk a lot about transgender and the way the transgender and LGBTQ agenda is working its way into our politics. I know that the state of Virginia recently enacted some legislation that would put in place some protections. There's a big case making its way to the Supreme Court. In fact, there's a huge article in the New York Times Magazine last Sunday about, do we really want people who are originalists interpreting the Constitution? Because they're looking at the case that's running up is the case that says you cannot discriminate on the basis of, race, religion, sex. And what happened under the Obama administration was, without a court order, without any legislation or anything, is the Obama administration changed that word sex to mean gender or sexual orientation preference, and that is not what the legislators intended when they enacted that statute. And the point is, if they want to change it through the legislation. Don't do it by executive order or fiat. So now a case is coming up to the Supreme Court to say, hopefully the court will say, no, that's not what the legislation intended. You can go back to Congress and you can enact that if you can get it passed, and get it passed by the House, get it passed by the Senate, get it signed by the President. But you just can't do this by legislative fiat. Well, about a year ago, Joe Biden was in Columbus, and he spoke at Human Rights Watch. And he said, if I'm elected president, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enact and get Congress to pass, and I will sign as my first act as president, the Equality Act. Now, the Equality Act has within it provisions that says that, listen, you have a right to freedom of religion, but any legislation that's been enacted, like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that was enacted and signed by Bill Clinton, by the way, back in the 90s, it said that, if laws on discrimination conflict with your religious liberty, your free exercise of religion, you're exempt from being held liable under the law. And ever since then, the Democrats, especially with the growth of the LGBT and transgender agendas, have been trying to get rid of that particular, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And this is what's happening in Europe. In Europe, you don't really have, they say you have freedom of religion, but what they mean is you have freedom to hold beliefs privately, but you can't do anything to act on them if they conflict with what we as your lords and masters think is different. Or if we think something's more important than your religious exercise, the exercise of your religion, you lose. Now, that's not the way the United States Constitution reads. The United States Constitution says you have the free exercise of religion, can't be affected by any law of Congress. But this is from Joe Biden's position paper. Now, he says he wants to put in the Equality Act. And then this is what he said. He released a policy statement a week or so ago about his position on LGBTQ issues. And this is what it says. In the misuse of broad exemptions to discriminate, religious freedom is a fundamental American value, but states have inappropriately used broad exemptions to allow business, medical providers, social service agencies, state and local government officials, and others to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people. The Trump-Pence administration has deliberately and systematically attempted to gut protections of the LGBTQ plus community by carving out broad religious exemptions to existing non-discrimination laws and policies across federal agencies. That's actually what the existing law of the United States says. It's you guys, it's you and Obama who tried to change what the Constitution says and what the Constitution protects. So you need to keep this in mind as we move forward to an election, and who knows if there's going to be an election now. I assume there's going to be one. But this is what Obama Biden, or whatever he calls himself, this is what he says. Biden will reverse Trump's policies misusing these broad exemptions and fight so that no one is turned away from a business or refused service by a government official just because of who they are or who they love. So he has no respect for the freedom of religion. And so as Christians, listen, we know that, I think we assume the persecution is coming, but we can fight against it. We have in this country the right to stand up in opposition to those sort of things and to exercise freedoms that we have. But just understand that there is a political party that wants to do this. For example, when they were negotiating about the coronavirus funding bill, the response bill, the emergency response bill, Nancy Pelosi tried to put in funding for abortions. A lot of Republicans went crazy. She eventually took it out, but said that it was going to be her top priority to get it back in and get it enacted. And so when the Republicans took it out, immediately all the pro-abortion people were out running around. Oh, they're using the coronavirus emergency to attack our rights. The world is insane. I noted a couple times this week, I did an interview with Tony on Minute to Midnight. You can find that on the Minute to Midnight channel. And I think I said it, I don't know, I've been talking to a lot of people, so I may have said it in that interview, but I'll say it now. There's been a great increase in the number of people that have been infected with and affected by the coronavirus. I think if you look at a spike of exponential growth in the effects of the coronavirus, I think that one line that's spiking even more quickly is the line of cognitive dissonance. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, because I listen to a lot of different people. I read a lot of different posts on Facebook and Twitter, and people are holding very inconsistent positions. And it's getting worse. Now, I didn't have time to do this, and I'm going to teach first hour in a couple weeks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Enneagram and maybe some other things that are going on in the church and false teaching that's coming on in the church. There was a event that grew out of this organization that was started by a professor at Wheaton called Neighborly Faith. And Neighborly Faith is essentially, we're going to get together with Muslims, Christians and Muslims, and we're going to talk about all the things we have in common, and then we're going to sing Kumbaya at the end, and everybody will go home happy. And this is not the way the Christian faith is to operate at all. Christian faith stands in stark contrast to all the other faiths, all the other beliefs, all the other religions of the world. It is exclusive in its claims of truth. But this infects our government. Here is Governor Tom Wolf issuing a proclamation in Pennsylvania recognizing it is an honor to join with the Council on American Islamic Relations Philadelphia chapter to welcome everyone gathered for their annual banquet. And this is the problem. This is what my friend Phil Haney, who's now with the Lord, was fighting against, this kind of compromise about it, being too being too accommodating to Islam. And Phil noted some of the organizations. So by the way, just before I forget on Phil, I saw a lot of things going around this week that the U.S. attorney or the assistant U.S. attorney in our federal system, we have districts. So for example, in Ohio, we have the Southern District of Ohio, we have the Northern District of Ohio, and they will have a courts and judges, and they will also have a U.S. attorney who's in charge of the administration of the Department of Justice within that particular district. They will conduct grand juries and that type of thing, and then the U.S. attorneys hire assistant U.S. attorneys. Now, Phil was found shot dead in the chest a couple weeks ago in near Sacramento, California. Actually near a park and ride where people pick up and commute together into Sacramento for work. Last week, an assistant U.S. attorney in Sacramento, they're investigating it. The initial conclusion, it was a murder-suicide. He killed his wife, and then he shot and killed himself. And now it's going around that he was the man who was investigating the death of Phil Haney. I do not know that to be the case. I looked into it as much as I could. It would be very unusual for an assistant U.S. attorney to be investigating a death like Phil Haney's at this stage of the investigation. It's usually in the hands of the FBI. So again, it's one of these things where I think people are connecting things that they see, the FBI in Sacramento is investigating it, a U.S. attorney in Sacramento committed suicide and killed his wife, and therefore there must be some connection. And I'm not sure that that's the case. It's possible, but I would be, knowing what I know about how the federal criminal justice system works, I would be very surprised to find out that to be the case. Now, with regard to this neighborly faith, I will play you clips of this when I have time to edit it down. There was at North Carolina State University, they held an event the other night, Hope in the Current Age, a conversation on Christianity and Islam. Imam Omar Suleimani, who is a recognized care supporter, I personally believe he comes across as a very nice person, but he is a committed Islamist. And he was invited to this thing. The person that was speaking on the other behalf was J.D. Greear. J.D. Greear is currently the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, at the bottom of this slide, you will see that there were certain sponsoring organizations. For example, they have, go down a little bit further, Brian. You have NF, that's Neighborly Faith. This was started by a professor at Wheaton University. Could you zoom out on that? There we go. Neighborly Faith at the bottom left, and then Cru, that's Campus Crusade for Christ, sponsored it. And then over here on the right, you have, on the far right, you have the Muslim Student Association and InterVarsity. They co-sponsored this event. Now listen, friends, the Muslim Student Association, they had a very sweet representative there who was talking with a person from Cru about how they were going to get along and all this stuff. And there's pictures all over Twitter and Facebook about how nice about how nice they are to each other. The Muslim Student Association is a radical Islamist organization. They are like CARE. And I will be honest with you, I am shocked and chagrined that the president of the Southern Baptists would go and do an event with this person. And I listened to it, and I'm telling you, in my judgment, it was it was pathetic. I don't know how else to say it. It was not a good defense of the faith. And I'm going to play you clips of this to see what you can. It was more along the lines of apologizing for Christianity's truth claims and how it might be offensive to others. Now, that's my paraphrase of it. You can find it online. You can go to the Neighborly Faith website and you can listen to it. It was, I don't know, an hour and a half, hour and 50 minutes long. Well, so now I'm going to talk about the coronavirus. Early this week, the World Health Organization declares virus a global pandemic. And when I saw the title, Who Declares Virus a Global Pandemic? And I thought immediately of the Who's on First routine of Abbott and Costello. Who declares a virus a global pandemic? That's right. No, who? Yeah, who? And the president also came out. He had previously limited travel from parts of Europe from the Schengen zone region, which is a lot of the countries of the EU, and Norway. Norway is in the Schengen zone, but it's not part of the EU. And of course, the UK and Ireland were excluded from that travel ban a couple weeks ago, maybe even longer ago now, that the president put in place. But he put in place the limits. And it's very interesting, the reaction of the world. Without getting into whether people are overhyping it or people are underplaying it or whatever, you can go out there and you can find any number of videos that support your conclusion on this particular issue. I don't think I've ever seen an issue that has led to such opposite conclusions and strong opinions, and people are really entrenched in what they believe. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's given some very interesting things. This is Mecca, the Kaaba, the Grand Mosque in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Usually this is packed. I mentioned last week that mosque currently is designed to accommodate 2 million worshipers at one time. Here you can count them on literally just about one hand, and they're probably just maintenance people. Now they've opened it up a little bit, but in some respects I'm not so sure that I'm upset that they're not able to go to Mecca to worship that false god there, the moon god. I'm also not upset that the Pope was not able to conduct his live audience at the Vatican in Rome. This is what they had set up for his weekly address, and it was live streamed instead, and it's in Italy, which is pretty much shut down, and they didn't have anything. This is St. Mark's Square in Venice. At the beginning of the usually very busy tourist season, in fact, there's been talk about limiting tourists quite a bit because of the strain they're putting on resources in Venice. This is the, on a Saturday, during the normal heavy flight time, this is the International Travelers Terminal at JFK Airport in New York. Now, I've been there a number of times. I don't think you would ever find it with only one person going through security. Everything is shutting down. It's amazing. Here's a little video that the New York Times put together about some of the impacts, looking at what does it look like from space, some of the things that are going on. Deserted public spaces, Disneyland in Japan, shut down. Fatima Mosque Shrine in Iran, shut down. In Milan, their shopping area, shut down. Tiananmen Square, shut down. It's having a huge, as this video notes, here's the taxis at Wuhan, China airport, none. Here's a toll plaza, nothing. Here's Tehran International Airport, essentially shut down. Volkswagen's at a plant in China that were being, this is in 2019, and this is what it looked like on March 4th. They're shipping out the vehicles that they have, but they're not making any. Nissan plant in Japan, same thing. You can see the impact that this thing is having just about everywhere. In fact, here's a street in Milan, Italy, and the headline there in the National Post from Canada, a picture of the shopping mall in Milan, which is usually teeming with crowds, particularly at this time of year. It says it looks like an apocalypse. Now, the reaction has been varied. So, for example, I was listening to someone on the radio, and they were just livid that the president didn't do enough early on. He didn't do anything. He should have shut things down. He should have quarantined things. I can't believe he wasn't doing things. It's ridiculous what he's doing. Within a minute, the same person was talking about what the president is doing now in shutting things down. And he's saying, I can't believe he's shutting everything down. He's restricting where people are going. He's violating my civil liberties. Now, listen, choose which one you want to believe, okay? But as I said, the cognitive dissonance that I see going up is crazy. So for example, when you go to, where did this thing come from? Was it a bioweapon that got out? Was it intentionally released? And so you will find people, they say, China intentionally released this, and it seems to be killing old people more, so they're trying to get rid of the old people. But then the question arises to me is, if that was China's intention, or whoever's intention, why did they shut down China to stop the spread? Why didn't they just let it run wild? There's this total cognitive dissonance, and I think it's unlike anything I've ever seen. And knowing that Jesus warned us about deception, I have to tell you, as I'm watching these different discussions take place and people holding these radically inconsistent things in their mind, is I'm very concerned that people are opening themselves up for delusion. The Democrats, here's a little bit of a timeline that I found at Breitbart about how the Democrats, when Trump came out and put the ban on travel, I think he held that down around January 31st. President Trump declares a national health emergency and opposes a ban on travel to and from China. Former Vice President Joe Biden calls Trump's decision hysterical xenophobia and fear-mongering. And now, what are they saying? Well, he didn't do enough. Well, but do you understand? I'm pretty sure, I know that I haven't lost my mind, and I know Pastor Steve hasn't, but sometimes I wonder about him. No, but the cognitive dissonance that's going on is, I think it's unlike anything that I've ever seen. And so this was in the middle of impeachment. And so they said, the only reason that Trump is doing this is to take away attention from the impeachment. It's a wag the dog thing. And then, once they lost the impeachment thing, then what happened? Trump's not doing anything. Why is he not doing something? He should be declaring an even bigger emergency than he declared. It's insane. The headlines have been interesting to watch. Even the New York Post, this was a title of one of my prophecy updates, World Turned Upside Down, at one point, so they didn't give me credit either. So, but the big impact has been that, that New York has shut everything down. Broadway theaters are closed. The NBA's canceled its season. Major League Baseball's delayed it. The NCAA tournament has been canceled. For those of you who don't live in the United States, we call it March Madness. I almost titled my update today March Madness. But the stock market dropped, went into bear territory. It dropped, and it's interesting when it dropped on, I think it was Thursday, at one point where it went into bear territory, it was, one of the indexes was down 1,666 points. And I'm just saying, it was, and at the same time that was the number that appeared on the charts, the percentage down was 6.66%. Now, you can draw any of your conclusions from that you want, but it could be just a coincidence. I personally think it's a coincidence, but things happen. Trump declared a national emergency. And of course, now everybody says he's trying to. At first, people were saying this is, again, the cognitive dissonance. So some people are saying is they're only doing this to try to undermine President Trump and undermine Prime Minister Netanyahu. Well, now President Trump has declared a national emergency, as has Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. So my question then is, are they operating against themselves? And so, listen, I don't know how this thing is going to play out. I don't know if it's overhyped. I see things that are very concerning to me. The director of the Ohio Department of Health came out and said that based on the studies that they're looking at, they believe that 1% of Ohioans, that would be about 110,000 people, are currently infected with the coronavirus. They just don't know it. So even though we've had a very small number of cases, we just don't have, nobody knows for sure. And I will admit to you, I have represented the Ohio Department of Health in litigation, and I know a lot of the people there. I don't know the director, but I know them to be very careful people and very concerned about public health, and I think that's what their main concern is. They work extra long hours when something like this comes up, and they don't get paid overtime. So they're not making this up so they make more money. I guess that's what I'm trying to tell you. I think they are genuinely concerned. Whether people are interpreting the data right or not, that's what we will have to determine. In Italy, they have essentially shut everything down. Restaurants, bars, cafes, malls, shopping, flights, travel, domestic, rail, subways. And this is a headline from Libero, a Italian newspaper. And it just says, Europe, essentially what the headlines say is, Europe doesn't care about us. So what this is happening with this now is there's a fracturing developed, which was already developed between Italy and other countries in Europe. And you see sort of Europe is sort of splitting apart at the seams. I don't think Europe is coming together over this. Everybody's operating on their own. I read one article this week that said, maybe the virus will kill the New World Order. Maybe it's not the New World Order using the virus to bring itself in, but the New World Order won't survive the nationalism that'll come out of people being concerned about their own countries in the midst of a crisis. So again, it's one of these things where you can go any direction you want with what's going on right now. We're at the beginning of this. We don't know how it's going to play out. And it bears watching. This is from Foreign Policy, just the article published yesterday. The EU is abandoning Italy in its hour of need. In a shameful abdication of responsibility, fellow countries in the European Union have failed to give medical assistance and supplies to Italy during an outbreak. China is filling the void. And that may be why Italy is a place where there's been a breakout, is because there's a close relationship between China and Italy. Just like there's a close relationship between China and Iran. As China has been taking steps over the last number of years, decade or so, to put in place what they call their Belt and Road Initiative to essentially control the flow of commerce all the way from China to Europe. And China's lent a lot of money in those areas, and that's what's coming. Macron came out and essentially said, we've got to shut everything down. So they're closing cafes in Paris. On the left is a Spanish newspaper. Spain has shut everything down. One doctor and public health person in Europe said that this virus was more virulent than what had been imagined at the beginning. And the cases have spiked to the point where now Italy is way beyond, I think, the number of cases that China had. And France is shut down. Italy shut down. Spain is shut down. Angela Merkel said she expected that maybe 70% of Germans would contract the virus. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to die. It just means that 70% of the people will get the virus in one form. And some people, they don't even know it. Some people have what seems to be a mild cold. But others get very, very sick, and there are some very severe consequences if people develop pneumonia and that sort of thing, is that the concern is, looking at the x-rays and analyzing things, doctors are very concerned that the people who get the most sick have severe fibrous damage to their lungs and reduced lung function, so that if they get reinfected a second time, which is happening, which is kind of unusual, there's been a number of cases of that, the people are at great risk of dying. Here's a freeway in Spain, picture taken today. So everything is shutting down. And I think it's easy to say that even among people that have been on this planet a lot longer than I have, that what they're seeing is unprecedented. This is even way beyond 9/11. At the time of 9/11, I was traveling quite a bit, flying coast to coast 3 out of 4 weeks in the month. I would see both oceans in the same week. Sometimes I would see the Atlantic at the beginning of the week and the Atlantic at the end of the week. And I remember when 9/11 shut everything down. The first flight I took was 13 days after 9/11, and there was me and 2 other people on a 737 flying to Philadelphia. And that didn't change for a while. You could get cheap hotel rooms, dirt cheap hotel rooms at Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons. It was a good time to travel if you weren't afraid of what would happen, if there was going to be a follow-on to what happened on 9/11. There's also concern that U.S. hospitals will face major challenges. Now, there's newspaper reports in Italy's war, triage decides life or death. Now, I read articles in other Italian newspapers that said, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're not making those type of decisions. We're treating everybody. But they don't have the infrastructure in Italy to do this. Washington Post has a good article about how different people are reacting to it. You see the lines there. The red line that kind of goes up and then flattens out, that's China. The line that's spiked way up at the beginning with number of cases, see how it spiked? That's Italy. And then the other line there is Iran. So you can see that some countries have gone way beyond where China was. And so everybody says, well, did China do the right thing? Should they have shut everything down? And the answer is, it looks like what China did was not too bad. Now, what China was trying to do was what the public health people in our country are trying to do. They're trying to flatten the curve. So on the left, you see what happens if they didn't do anything. you see this tremendous spike. The dotted line along the middle there is healthcare system capacity. Now, this is from an Irish newspaper, The Sun, but this is, you'll see, I think you've probably seen this chart everywhere. They're trying to flatten out the curve. So if they do nothing, it overwhelms the healthcare system. If you want to understand what happens when that overwhelms the healthcare system, look at what's happening in Iran and Italy, because they have gone way beyond their capacity. South Korea did pretty well. The difference being is South Korea for a long time has prepared for a major war with mass casualties at the beginning of that war with their neighbor North Korea. As a result of that, South Korea has a very large emergency response capacity in their healthcare system. So even though they have a lot of smokers in that country and they are somewhat an aging population, they've done pretty well with handling the coronavirus because they have the ability to get people on respirators, they have ICU beds. Here's a little report from NBC News Friday night talking about the response that I think one of the big concerns that they have about the healthcare system. Here we go. Do we have sound? Are you guys getting sound back there? So, I'll put it back to the beginning here and see if that works.
Dr. Joseph Fair explain how prepared we are for what's to come.
At any given normal time, hospitals are almost at full capacity, and the doctors and nurses are mostly working at the maximum level they can work. There are currently around 45,000 ICU beds in this country, but you have to remember those beds are currently occupied by patients already using them, so coronavirus patients, that's going to add even more to the burden.
The fear is what we call surge capacity. Do we have enough beds for the amount of sick people that are going to require intensive care? We know that we don't. In fact, it's a certainty that we don't have enough intensive care beds, we don't have enough places to put people, nor do we have the equipment, the ventilators, and everything else that we'll need to treat those severely ill individuals. So I can say with certainty that we won't have enough respiratory ventilators in the case of a respiratory pandemic, which is exactly what we're in.
A big limiting factor are the number of ventilators we have, right around 160,000. By some estimates, even a moderate epidemic can cause 200,000 cases, so they'll need those ventilators. Some are already being used. At that point, what has to happen is doctors need to make a triage decision. Who can stay on the ventilator, who needs to be removed from the ventilator, and who can we take care of at that point?
When we're talking about flattening the curve, we're talking about the mathematical projections of how many people this virus will infect over time.
The only way we can flatten the curve right now is by getting absolutely everyone on the same page with regards to the safety and precautionary measures. Without testing, to be honest, we're flying blind. It's impossible to say until we actually get the test out and running, but it's obviously put us far behind where we need to be.
The biggest way to control coronavirus is to keep it contained.
So the best thing you can do is practice that rigorous hygiene that we keep talking about, washing your hands regularly, keeping your distance from others. That's a social distancing. So prepare for those lifestyle changes and implement them now.
And of course, there has been shopping panic in some respects. I went to Costco out in Plain City, Dublin yesterday, and I got there an hour after the store opened. There was one person ahead of me in line when I checked out. I didn't check the paper goods aisle. There are alternatives to toilet paper, like a garden hose, if you need to, a toilet brush, somebody suggested. But there has been in a lot of parts of the country pretty severe buying. Now, part of that is Americans are not well prepared as a general rule, and so I guess I would say, I saw somebody tweet this the other day: carelessness is not faith, and common sense is not panic. I thought that was a very astute and wise thing. It's, you're not demonstrating a lack of faith if you go out and buy some extra groceries. And if you have some extra to share them. That's fine. But it's not a situation. I just object to it. Some people, they want to use the example, well, Jesus walked on the water because he had, the faith and everything. And I'm like, I think he only did that once. Every other time he took a boat, right? There's a lot of stories of him taking a boat from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other. So God gives you common sense to act. And then one of the questions somebody asked was, well, if it's okay to shop with hundreds of people around you, why isn't it okay to have a basketball game? Pam and I were talking about this, and I said, I know why. Well, one, the game lasts a lot longer than you are in the store. And two, you don't have a bunch of people at the store around you trying to referee the game from the 38th row. Think about that, because they're yelling at the ref all the time. That's not happening too much in the store. So in any event, at least where I was yesterday, everything seemed to be okay. They were limiting, you can only buy one package of organic chicken. I guess maybe that's Dublin, Ohio, that's sort of, there's a run on organic chicken in Dublin, Ohio. I don't maybe that's the way the people around me are, and I don't know it. But this is a story in the UK. Here's a little thing also from the same NBC News report, a little bit about the shopping thing that's going on.
Tonight, with COVID-19 cases on the rise, crowds converging on stores nationwide, leaving shelves all but empty before waiting hours to check out.
A lot of overreaction around the place, and if everyone takes it nice and easy and not panic, it's the best for everyone.
This is the line.
In California, customers growing so desperate, one sheriff tweeting, "Please don't call 911 because people are cutting in front of you in line." At a New York Costco, a new rule: wipe down your grocery cart before setting foot inside. The new policy is not just for sanitation. Major stores also capping purchases on water, hand sanitizer, certain medicines, and the one item that's flying off the shelves.
Yeah, I just don't understand it. I don't understand why everyone's buying toilet paper.
Well, and everybody is. And it leads to some kind of interesting interactions. When I was leaving Costco yesterday, they always have to put that mark across your receipt. And so I went like this with the receipt, and the guy didn't know what to do because he couldn't make the mark because it was kind of waving in midair. He said, you have to hold that so I can write on it. I'm not allowed to touch it. So, but, you go through the store, and what happens? There are people picking up things and putting them back on the shelf, and then you pick them up, and so there's a lot of little inconsistencies, and there's now sort of a new way of getting used to it. I saw one where you're supposed to bow, and then you kind of touch opposite feet. That's the new way to greet people in the age of the coronavirus. And things are just shut down everywhere. This is, I'll talk a little bit about Israel, but Israel shut everything down. Nobody's coming into Israel now. This is a huge decision for Netanyahu and the government to make there, especially in the wake of an election that hasn't really decided anything for the third time. They just have a caretaker government. They don't know if they're going to go to a fourth election. But they've shut everything down. I have friends that live in the Palestinian area, and they're 1 week into a 2-week lockdown. And is it going to be just 2 weeks? How long is it going to be? But they're shutting down restaurants, cafes, everything in Israel. I see stores around here sort of limiting their hours of operation. That may be so that their employees can actually restock the shelves because they're selling a lot of goods. But one of the things that I think is the most important thing, and I think this kind of plays into Bible prophecy a bit, with regard to the impact of the coronavirus is the economic impact. That, and I see people say, everything's going wrong because of media hype and media panic. I disagree. Okay, I'm going to tell you why I disagree. China had a major problem. China essentially shut down its industrial production for almost 2 months. And I've heard that maybe only 30% of it is back online because they're trying to manage the virus. But that has a ripple effect. You saw the pictures of the cars, full lots of manufactured cars that are now less than half full. And they still haven't really started auto production yet because the supply chain has been disrupted. The supply chain was not disrupted because of media hype. The supply chain was disrupted because the largest manufacturing country in the world shut down. When they shut down, that has a ripple effect. One of the areas where it's had a ripple effect is in the area of oil, the prices for oil. I bought gas yesterday for $1.82. That's good, but that has a ripple effect. I am told that the fracking wells and everything are all shut down because the price of oil is so low. It costs more than $36, or it actually went down, I think, to $27 at one point. And that has a huge impact. That's going to affect the oil industry. It's going to affect economies that have done pretty well recently, like Eastern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, and other places, because they're not going to be there's going to be a lot of bankruptcies in the fracking industry. It also has impacts on China and Russia. And so China and Russia have kind of gotten into this oil price war. Not China and Russia, Saudi Arabia and Russia. Saudi Arabia wanted to limit production, thinking by limiting production, the price would go up a little bit. Russia says, no, we need a certain amount of oil revenue coming in for our budgets and social welfare payments and that sort of thing. So we're not going to agree to that. So Saudi Arabia says, okay, we'll show you. We have the lowest cost of oil production in the world. We're going to completely open, literally, the oil production floodgates, and we're going to drive the price down even further. So that's led to disruption in the House of Saud. The king of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, has arrested some of his cousins. I talked about that last week. So it's causing a tremendous amount of disruption. So oil is, in the $35 range now. Russia needs it to be at $42 a barrel to make it. Saudi Arabia, with everything and all the princes and hangers-on that they have and social welfare payments and guaranteed income payments that they make, they really need it to be at about $90 a gallon. Now, both Russia and Saudi Arabia have sovereign wealth funds. Saudi Arabia's is huge, so they can stand a bear market in oil for a while. Russia, it's going to have an impact on much sooner. And now we have, and a lot of these countries too, like there were elections in France that they had to postpone, or they were trying to get those done. There were elections in Iran when all of this thing broke out. So this thing is just causing, this little tiny bug is causing big problems all over the place. The stock market on Wednesday, Thursday went down into bear territory, largest drops in a day. Now it did rally, one of the biggest rallies, maybe the biggest in Wall Street history on Friday. But you're going to see, I think, a lot of disruption. And my personal belief is that the economic disruption that's flowing out of this, which I do not believe in large part is caused by media panic or media hype or anything like that. The investors on Wall Street and the financial people, they are pricing in the economic disruption that occurred when China shut down. And this is what this is what people, analysts have been saying for a long time. If something goes wrong, could be a war, could be, and I don't even know if they talked about a pandemic at the time, but something is going to disrupt that supply chain, and it's going to blow apart the economic system in the world. And I think we're seeing that happen, and I don't think this is going to resolve itself in 6 months. It's going to be around for a while, and it's going to be up and down, but I think it's going to be, at least for a time, it's going to be trending downward ultimately. So you can be happy about what happened Friday, but you can't ignore what happened on Wednesday and Thursday in the markets. And they're going to be like this. And it could be, look, this thing may burn itself out. It may not be a problem, and come July, we'll wonder what was everybody so concerned about. On the other hand, maybe not. Maybe it'll be even worse, and we don't know the full extent of it. So everywhere you look, the headlines, New York Times, Washington Post, stocks dive, recession fears rise, bear market, Arab news, Black Monday, oil price slump, virus spark, market meltdown. It's the same thing in the Al Akbar newspaper from Lebanon. Here's just sort of a conglomerate. This is from Gulf News in the United Arab Emirates. Virus, oil trigger, global meltdown. Listen, the people that were saying these things, they're not making it up. There really has been a meltdown over the last week. Here's an interesting graphic from Arab News about how the virus has kind of punctured the oil. The oil barrels are wheels on the oil demand bus, and now they're going flat. Again, this is the Saudi-Russia standoff that's causing mass turmoil, and it's happening in the politics in Russia. It's happening in the royal family of this. Here's the market turndown that took place, the big one on Wednesday, where the market went down. This is when I think the market at about 3:15 on Wednesday, on the 11th, that's when it hit that 6.66% down. Wall Street Journal had a good summary yesterday of the virus that upended the business world. Cancellation calculation, assessing the risk, finding a way forward, how to decide if it's time to buy. A contagion rages from coast to coast. And really, again, regardless of the reaction in the United States, the big trigger in my mind is what happened in China when they shut everything down. And here's sort of virus upends the world of business, and they're showing all the different things. Hotels down, cruise lines have shut down for a couple months now. They're going to be shut down for at least a couple months. All the sports leagues are shut down. A Facebook friend, I had posted NBA cancel season, jazz player tested positive. Now, bless her heart, she's from the UK. I think she's from the UK, and she said, what does a jazz player have to do with the NBA? So I wrote to her, and I was just kind of joking when I explained, well, you see, the Utah Jazz used to be in New Orleans, which is the home of American jazz, but then they moved to Utah, where jazz has nothing to do with Utah, but they kept the name jazz. Utah's more associated with rock, not rock of the music kind, but rock of the canyon and cliff kind. And I was just kind of joking with her. And she said, well, thanks, that was as clear as mud. But, this is, the Masters tournament has been postponed, this thing. And again, these are some Arab newspapers talking about this. Now, there were rumors that King Salman had had a stroke, he had died, but there was a picture of him in this newspaper of him at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, and it could be a fake picture, but it appears that he is there. There's also reports that Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, has been diagnosed with the coronavirus, but here's a screen clip of a speech that he gave. So you're going to hear a lot of rumors, who has it, who doesn't, that sort of thing. Heaven forbid you should cough in public now, because people will run screaming for the exits, although I see the Cabela's, I heard Cabela's is completely sold out of ammunition, so better be sure you cover your cough, because there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of ammunition now, it appears. But they're usually responsible people, so they're not going to do anything. But look, everything is disrupted. Again, Israel has initially, early this week, they're saying everybody who was coming to Israel had to go into a 2-week quarantine. Well, if you're there on a 2-week tour or a 12-day tour and you have to spend 14 days in quarantine, That sort of makes it, I don't think I'm going to go on that tour. And now they've completely shut it down. And this is enormous impact for the Israeli economy, even in the Palestinian areas. Tourism is a very, very important part of everything over there. So, so you can say, oh, it's nothing, it's all overhyped, but then I see, rational people making decisions to completely shut down their country at great economic cost in the midst of a uncertain outcome. Netanyahu's trial has been continued now until May, and who knows if it's even going to go forward in May. And pictures of, if you've ever been to Israel, when you get there, there's this giant entrance hall at Ben Gurion Airport, and it's just, and when you go to leave, it's a bit of a madhouse at the departures terminal at Ben Gurion, and picture after picture is just, everything is just completely empty. At the same time this is going on, again, this conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt over this dam that Ethiopia is bringing online, and now they can't agree. And this is from Arab News, the Saudi Arabian newspaper, that they're in a very dangerous deadlock. And some people think they're on the verge of war over it. And what happens? How does this end? So listen, so you're going to see, Jesus said you'll hear wars and rumors of wars, that type of thing. It'll be perilous times. People will be looking at things with perplexity, anxiety. And so this is the way I think it's going to be for a while, maybe till the Lord returns. But, look, Christians should know that we know how this thing works out eventually. We know if something happens to us where we end up. And I think it's a good time to go out and share the gospel with people that, you may not have the time that you thought you had. Seriously. I mean, some of us could get the coronavirus this week and not be here next Sunday if it goes the wrong way. So who knows if that, and by the way, just so people know, there are a few people here, but for the most part, we've decided to kind of play things week by week here at FBC. So we're not really having public services, but we are going to be streaming our messages for the time being. So let me talk about just a couple things and we'll be finished up here. Vladimir Putin. He has, with people in the Duma, the legislature in Russia, has put in place constitutional changes, or I guess I would say loopholes. He's been, his sort of a version of the czar for 20 years now. His term is supposed to be over in 2024. He doesn't seem to want to leave office, so he's putting in changes. One of the people that was his big supporters, by the way, if you remember back in 1963, there was a female Russian cosmonaut who spent 71 hours in space, at the time the all-time record. She's now in her 80s. She has a Russian name, so I won't try to pronounce it. But she's been there pushing this in front of the legislature, the Duma, to get Putin this loophole. And so there's the law in Russia is, or the constitution says you really can't run after a certain number of terms. And so essentially what they're doing with Putin is they're just sort of like, well, they're repunching the clock, so they're pretending like he's not run before. So he could stay in office until 2036. It's been very controversial. This report in Investia said that Russia has 83 administrative regions. The amendments were also approved by the Russia-imposed legislatures in Crimea, which Russia forcibly seized from Ukraine in 2014, and the Crimean naval port city of Sevastopol. The legislation set Putin's presidential term count back to 0. There'll be a nationwide vote to approve that on April 22nd. I'm going to make a bold prediction right now, and I'm going to predict that Putin's going to prevail in that particular election. In the Wall Street Journal, yesterday, there was a very good article about why Putin really can't leave. Vladimir Putin is prepared to run for a 5th term. What's the point of being subtle, asked close Putin ally and parliamentarian deputy Valentina Tereshkova, that's her name, the first woman in space. This is about us and the future of our country. But Mr. Putin left himself with little alternative. If he wants to protect his cronies and avoid a grim historical reckoning, he cannot surrender power. This is Wall Street Journal yesterday. According to, there's the article, Putin can't afford to leave office. He's beholden to a lot of people. 135 oligarchs in Russia control the vast majority of the wealth. And Putin has to balance that. Putin himself has amassed quite a massive fortune. So, and Putin thinks that, well, if I stay in office, that's going to be very stabilizing. Now, it's interesting. Last week, Putin and Erdogan got together, and some people pulled out some videos and showed Putin does everything to make a point. Erdogan does everything to make a point, and so it's like a little chess game. And so sometimes somebody does something. So here's Erdogan arriving at the palace to see Putin, and he's waiting in the room. Now, the picture on the left there is I can't remember the Tsar of Russia, but defeated the Ottomans. So while Erdogan is waiting, and this is going to go on for about a minute and a half, I'll just warn you, Putin is in the other room on the other side of the door waiting for Erdogan to come. Now, there's nothing preventing Putin for allowing Erdogan to come in right away, unless he's trying to make a point. So you see the Turkish delegation, they're fixing their ties, they're looking at their watches, what's going on. I think this is the defense minister. Do we have the right starting time that we're supposed to be here to meet him? And there's that Tsar who beat the Ottoman Empire badly. And so Erdogan's standing under his picture doing this. And what you're going to see is Erdogan, he's my age, by the way. He's 2 days younger than I am, and he had his birthday a couple weeks ago, so happy birthday, Mr. Erdogan, Sultan Erdogan. And now they're like, Erdogan says, well, I'm going to, so eventually what you're going to see is Erdogan sits down. And it's very interesting where he sits down, because where he sits down is the butler's, it's known as the butler's chair. So it's kind of a humiliating thing. And you see Putin over there, he's just waiting on him. Okay, he sat down. Okay, bring him in. He sat in the butler's chair. So let's bring him in. And you'll see Erdogan come in now. And very interesting. It's amazing. You know, I love the internet for certain reasons. But then the other thing that happened too is here at the delegation, the Turkish delegation on the left is standing there. But what are they standing under? This is important. They're standing under a statue of Catherine the Great, who also had a massive victory against the Ottoman Empire. This was highly symbolic. There you go, there's Catherine the Great. And they're underneath Catherine. And they stood there the whole time. This was not a mistake. Now, they were meeting about the dispute that's going on between Russia and Turkey over Idlib. This is from South Front. And I use the maps from South Front because I think the guy does a great job. But he's very pro-Syrian. So he's looking at, on the left, the green line is where Erdogan said he's going to take over. That's what he wants to take over. Because you see the red dots, those are Turkish outposts. So he wanted to take beyond those Turkish outposts. And on the right is where he's actually ended up. Now I'm going to play a clip of Jennifer Caffarella. She is with the Institute for the Study of War. She is very much oriented. She's pro-American. She's very much against Russia. She thinks Russia is very dangerous. And she thinks America's response to Russia has been pretty weak with what's been going on in Syria. And there's this massive refugee crisis now. So this is Jennifer Caffarella from the Institute for the Study of War, understandingwar.org, testifying at a congressional hearing. So this is about 3 or 4 minutes long. But I find her very intelligent, very articulate, and I think she is very good at making her policy points that she wants to make. So here's Jennifer Caffarella.
As has already been mentioned, the recent mass displacement caused by the military campaign waged by Russia, Iran, and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is the largest of the war to date. The humanitarian crisis that it has caused is an unsustainable problem for Turkey, which cannot accept more refugees and is instead trying to repatriate the refugees it does have into other parts of northern Syria. Turkey launched a major military intervention in late January to prevent further civilian displacement, coming to blows with Russia, despite their past collaboration in Syria. It is the largest rift between Turkey and Russia in Syria to date. Turkey deployed as many as 20,000 troops to establish a defensible front line against Assad, Russia, and Iran. Those troops are now establishing the start of a safe zone along the border, but without the resources to address the humanitarian crisis in that zone. Turkey's military pressure did succeed in forcing Putin into a new de-escalation agreement in Idlib, which was Erdogan's initial goal. These are big asks, but now is the time to make them. The scale of Turkey's military intervention in Idlib demonstrates the priority Turkey's President Erdogan places on preventing a further worsening of the refugee and humanitarian situation on the border. He has stepped up. It's time for the United States to do the same. It speaks to Russia's wider effort, not only to keep the Assad regime in power, but to re-normalize it among the international community, as well as to co-opt and degrade international institutions, including the UN. This is about far more than just Syria. It is therefore vital that the United States hold this line or risk setting additional precedent that I guarantee Russia will attempt to use elsewhere. It is important not only, therefore, to preserve as many of the lives as possible that are at risk in Idlib, but also to preserve the rules-based international order, as Dana has already mentioned, that Russia is trying so hard to degrade. It's important. I applaud the administration for what they have already done to prevent the renormalization of the Assad regime, and we need to do far more, as you have rightly noted, to hold accountable the UN and other aid organizations for not enabling this regime and its backers. I think in some respects, the United States actually needs to learn from the Russians in this case. Putin has strong-armed Erdogan into multiple agreements that favor Russia and disfavor Turkey because Russia has leverage over Turkey and knows how to use it. I am recommending that we start doing the same. We start putting options on the table that include incentives for good behavior from Erdogan, which does need to include not only addressing the humanitarian situation, but also not using the refugee population to accomplish its objectives of ethnic cleansing by resettling Arab refugees in Kurdish areas. And we need to put coercive leverage on the table because Erdogan is not behaving as an ally and he's not going to start to. But the scale of the demands that I am recommending that we make of Erdogan are consistent with the scale of the demands that Putin has continued to make of Erdogan. It's time that we begin to play the actual great power politics that is underway in Syria and has been underway in Syria since 2015, instead of watching from the sidelines and hoping and wishing for enduring ceasefires and a political solution to the war. In my view, there have been multiple turning points. We're entering our 10th year of the war. But I would point to the Russian intervention in 2015. But I think the actual turning point was a passive decision that we made to cede Syria to the Russians. There was no reason actually we needed to do that. We continue to act like the Russians are 10 feet tall, even though the Russian commitment to Syria is actually quite limited, and Russian capabilities are actually far, far smaller than the Russians claim and that the world seems to see. The Turks are demonstrating, actually, the limits of Russia's leverage and military capability in Syria through the Turkish campaign in Idlib, which has imposed costs on the regime, but also on the Russians, because Turkey has attacked Russian proxy forces and destroyed Russian-provided air defense systems. So in my view, it is our inaction, actually, that was the turning point, and especially with respect to the Russians. We're ceding we're ceding an entire theater to a man, Putin, that considers the United States his top enemy.
And she's 100% correct. And he's been very clever. Now, listen, in the book, and you may not agree with this, and I want to disclaimer at the beginning, I am not date setting, okay? I am not date setting. But you would have to be blind not to understand the geopolitical, whatever prophetic scriptures they are, they take place in a real world geopolitical context of the end times. And you see so many different elements and threads of that geopolitical context of today that ties directly into Scripture. Now, so here's Putin, and we can argue, is Putin Gog, is he not Gog, is Russia part of this, is not Russia part of this? Let's just say Russia is part of this scenario in the end times. You have a number of things going on. For example, the Temple Institute this week released a video talking about the red heifer. I don't have time to play it. I'll try to play it next week. Well, I have time to play it. I'm not going to play it because I don't have it ready to play, to be honest with you. But you can find it. Go to the Temple Institute website. And I'm not going to argue, I don't want to argue about whether the temple's holy or not holy or anything like that. I believe there will be a temple in this last period before the Lord returns. And part of that, what's required for the temple, really what's not required for the temple, but for the sacrifices that will be started and that they're already practicing, are the ashes of the red heifer. And now they have these red heifers in Israel, and I think there are 2 of them, and they still are, the one has a little patch of white hairs, but they said he might grow out of it. That's why they have to wait a couple years after they're born before they determine whether they qualify as the red heifer. And they're optimistic, I think, at least as I understood the person from the Temple Institute who was talking, they're optimistic that these red heifers could qualify as the red heifers that are described in Scripture. And that would bring us one step closer. Putin, you've seen, he's, I think, 67 or 68, and he's planning on staying in office maybe for another 16 years. There's sort of I have sort of a cautious admiration for him, that he can sit there in these boring meetings with all these other boring world leaders and kind of act interested and not fall asleep. I mean, that's admirable to me. I would be like, you guys talk about it, I'm going to play golf or tennis or something like that. But listen, he wants to stay in power. It means money and power to him. It's a big deal. And he's putting it through the legislature where he could stay in power for another 16 till 2036. Now, there's an interesting verse in Hosea chapter 5, verse 15, and it continues into chapter 6, and it says, after 2 days, he will revive us. And then in the beginning part of Hosea 6, it says, the Lord will return. I will go to my place and I will return when you call for me. And it's talking about the Jewish people probably under great distress. But the 2-day thing is what's interesting. For 2 days, after 2 days, he will revive us, and then there will be a great day. Now, if you follow the scriptural thing that a day is as 1,000 years, 2 days would be 2 times 1,000 is 2,000. Unlike some of our New York Times editorial board people, I can actually do simple math. But 2,000. So some people believe, and I tend to believe this way myself, is that 2,000 years after Christ went to his place, went to be with the Father, he will return sometime in that 2,000-year period. Not saying it's precise or anything like that, and other people have charted out a lot of calculations. But after 2 days, he will revive us. He will return to set up his millennial kingdom for 1 day, 1,000 years, at the end of that period of time. So if Jesus was caught up to heaven, ascended to heaven after around 32 AD, that would be what, 2030, 2032, depending on how you calculate it. And we don't know, I don't think we know precisely. I think we have some good ideas, but so that, and then if you figure there's a 70th week of Daniel for 7 years before that return, so you take 2030 minus 7, that's 2023, or 2032 minus 7 is 2025. And it might be even a few years out beyond that. I'm just saying is that I think you need to pay, if that is even, if that's true, the 2 days part, and you're seeing these world leaders on the stage changing their constitutions so that they're in power past that date, do you understand where I'm going with this? You need to pay attention to what these guys are doing. Now, Erdogan's becoming unpopular. So I'm not setting a date. I'm just telling you there's a lot of solid Bible prophecy teachers that feel that way. And I personally lean that way too, but I'm not 100% certain. So it's kind of interesting. And you just have this conflict that's going on. Now, this week there were some attacks on some bases of the U.S. in Iraq, and the U.S. responded and attacked a number of bases of the Iraqi version of Hezbollah. So that situation is heating up, and they can't form a government in Iraq either. And then there's Iran. I think I finish up with this. Let me just double check my notes. Well, I have just a little bit about Israel right after this. But this is interesting. So here's Iran. In Iran, there are a number of important cities, but Tehran, of course, is the capital. And then there is Qom. That is their holy city. In Qom, there is a mosque. It has Fatima in the name. It's a very popular mosque. It's right in the center of Qom. You see below the gold dome, you see that sort of ceiling inset there. That's very intricate. Here's a picture underneath it looking up. It's an amazing thing. But in Qom, you have this mosque, this shrine. And one of the problems, they've had an outbreak of the coronavirus there, and one of the things they do is when they're going in, or in there, there's a gate that they lick. And they continued to lick this gate even after people started getting sick. And it took, because this is a holy thing to do. I mean, it's similar to like in Israel right now, the rabbis have said, don't kiss the medusa on the doorway. Don't touch the medusa and kiss it like they're prone to do, because we don't know right now. It's okay that you don't do that. But Iran didn't get that for a long time, and people are still continuing to do this, even kids and that type of thing. So incredibly beautiful architecture and ceiling there. But satellite photos, this was in the Washington Post on Friday, I believe. The headline of the article was that there's this graveyard. So the mosque is there in the center of Qom at the bottom, and this graveyard in the holy city of Qom above. And here is a satellite picture of it. And here's the article in the Washington Post. Massive burial pits suggest a more dire situation in Iran. Now, this is so interesting because now there's very little that's really secret, you know? Because satellite pictures are everywhere. And so you saw the satellite pictures early on showing cars that were, car lots, they could compare them. There are not a lot of secrets in this world today, especially with the satellite technology and the quality of camera, the ability of camera to take very detailed, high-resolution pictures. So what they've done is they have noticed, and now this is some videos on the right, if you could zoom out, Brian. This is a morgue in Qom that was taken about a week ago. And these are people that they're dealing with the bodies, people who have died from the coronavirus in Qom. And you can see they're stacked up all over the place. When you go out to, and again, this shows that even in a tightly controlled country like Iran, these videos get out. And here's another video of the actual graveyard. And you'll see that this person, he sort of takes you on a tour of the graveyard. They're bringing a coffin in to deposit the body. And this is unusual too, because in Islamic culture, they try to bury you within 24 hours. And the bodies have stacked up and they haven't been able to deal with them because there are so many of them. And he says, look, they say only 34 people have died, but there are at least 80 graves here right now. And he goes down and he shows you all the recent graves. And he said, this is where they buried the coronavirus victims. And what they found in this graveyard is they look at the graveyard from the satellite is right here. You see these trenches. And this is about the length of a football field. And so they're digging these trenches to handle the bodies, burying them side by side in the grave there. So this is a big deal, and the numbers may be far worse in Iran than than the government is willing to admit, and that's what the word coming out is. And so people say, it's just the flu. It's just like every other flu. There's tens of thousands of deaths from the flu each year. Now, I'm an older man now, and Pam and I were talking about this the other night, and I know that your own personal anecdotal experience is not necessarily the best judge of things, but we were talking like, do you know anybody who ever died of the flu? And we don't know of anybody. I know there are. I know it happens. But people say it's just the flu. A lot of people die. So why are we worried about this one than other ones? So here's a statistic. In Italy, in the few months leading up to the outbreak of the coronavirus, they had 200 deaths in Italy from the flu, the regular flu. On Wednesday or Thursday, they had over 200 deaths that day from the coronavirus. So I'm just saying I don't think it's just the flu. I look at the reaction of people that I know, and I'm wondering why, if it's nothing, why are they reacting this way? Now, of course, you can say, well, they're just trying to take control of everything. And they're trying to, and look, they want to ban cash, right? And so there's a lot of prophecy books out there that talk about the coming cashless society. Now, my personal view is that the most important thing about that whole prophecy is the mark of the beast. Now, I don't know if the mark of the beast is a cashless system or not. It may be the mark that's the operative thing. And so, I don't know. Does the Antichrist, will he take cash? I personally think he will. But look, the electronic thing is much easier to control. And most of us, how many of you have ever gotten paid in cash for work that you've done? You get a check, or they deposit it direct into your account. So there's already, personally, most of my transactions are cashless already. But the big important thing is the mark. And the mark comes, I believe, Pastor Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's the Antichrist first, then the mark. Am I right? Okay. You can say amen. No, so I think, we can speculate and we can talk about how this might play out. But I think the most important thing is the mark and what the mark represents and that type of thing. That's just my view based on Scripture. And it may be a cashless society, but it may not. But the operative term, it says you can't buy or sell without the mark. So that's just my view. And again, Israel, a lot of talk in Israel right now about coming up with an emergency unity government. Netanyahu and Gantz met the other day. President Rivlin has recommended this, but things are in turmoil. Netanyahu came and said, yeah, I'm on board, let's talk. And they talked, I think, on the phone. And Gantz started coming up with all these demands and everything, and the talks fell apart. And Gantz was even talking earlier this week, which is his party, the Blue and White Party, has 3 former heads of the IDF in it. And they're talking about joining in at least a temporary unity government with the Joint Arab List, which are parties that are completely against Israel. And so a lot of people in Israel going is like, why are we even voting for Gantz if he's going to join in with this joint Arab list that doesn't even want there to be an Israel? And so everything is in a huge turmoil there, huge turmoil in Europe, China, Asia, and now quite a bit of disruption here in the United States as we deal with this, try to figure out what it is we're exactly dealing with on this coronavirus. It's a very turbulent time. It's time to rest in the Lord and not be fearful. I told someone the other day, are you bothered by this? And I'm like, I'm sort of strangely calm. I do think, though, the biggest thing that we're going to be dealing with in the near term is going to be this economic disruption. I don't think that that's going to turn around. And that, in a sense, is prophetic, too. We know that economic disruption like that is coming at some point. Is this it? I don't know. You saw a historic drop in the markets this week. Saw a little bit of a bounce back on Friday. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? I think a week and a half ago, I think the market was near all-time record high. And now here we are 10 days later, and the world's in quite a bit of turmoil. No basketball, no sports, and they may shut down restaurants and that type of thing. So listen, if you haven't done at least a little bit of preparation, I think it's really time that you use some common sense and go out and do that. So let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Lord, pray that you will keep us anchored in your truth, the truth of your word, the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Give us opportunities to share that with others. Give us opportunities to be good witnesses for the Lord with others in what appears to be a very turbulent time everywhere in the world. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.